You feel it first in the knees. You're 60 years old, deep in the grass, and the herd is moving. The young hunters are already gone, flickers of legs disappearing over the ridge, spears bouncing on their backs. You try to keep up. You can't. Your lungs burn, your hip locks, and the gap between you and the food of your whole tribe stretches wider with every step. You stop. You bend over your knees in the dust, and you listen to the sound of everyone you love running away from you. So what happens now? To an old human who can no longer chase down a meal? Here's what you assume. You assume they got left behind. A burden. A mouth that eats and gives nothing back, quietly abandoned to the lions so the young and useful could survive. And you would be almost exactly wrong. Because in the world of ancient humans, that gasping 60-year-old was not the weakest link in the band. They may have been the single most valuable person in it. So what actually happened to ancient humans when they got too old to hunt? The answer flips the whole story of how our species survived at all. Let's start with a lie you've been told your entire life. The lie is that ancient people didn't get old. You've heard it 100 times. Life expectancy back then was 30, so there were no elders to worry about. Everybody just died young. That number is real, but it is playing a trick on you. Life expectancy was dragged down to 30 by babies. So many infants died, a quarter, sometimes more, before their 5th birthday, that the average got crushed toward 0. But an average is not a countdown clock ticking over your head. Here's the part the number hides. If you survived childhood, if you made it past all the diseases and accidents that killed the little ones, your odds changed completely. Look at the Hadza, a living hunter-gatherer people in Tanzania, studied for decades. The most common age of death for a Hadza adult isn't 30. It's closer to 70. Old age is not a modern invention. Gray hair walked the savannah 100,000 years ago. So the elders were real. The band was full of them. Which brings back the question that matters. Once a human is too slow, too stiff, too worn out to bring home meat, what on earth are they for? To answer that, meet the most quietly powerful figure in all of human evolution. Not the hunter, the grandmother. In the 1980s, an anthropologist named Kristen Hawkes went to live among those same Hadza, expecting the hunters to be the story. Instead, she noticed something she couldn't stop watching. The hardest workers in the entire camp weren't the young men, they were the old women. Picture one of them. She's past 60, her own childbearing years are long finished, and every single day she is out in the heat with a sharpened digging stick, driving it into rock-hard ground to rip out deep wild tubers, knotty, buried roots that a child's small arms and a child's patience simply cannot reach. She digs longer than the young mothers. She digs longer than almost anyone. And then she gives most of it away. Here's the strange part. Watch who eats what she digs. It isn't mainly her, it's her grandchildren. And Hawkes noticed that when a new baby arrives and a mother is suddenly too busy nursing to forage, it is the grandmother who steps in and feeds the older, just-weaned child. The very children whose mothers are most tied down are the children whose grandmothers dig the most. That is not a burden feeding off the group. That is a second engine of food, running full-time, aimed straight at the survival of the young. And this points at one of the deepest riddles in biology, hiding in plain sight in your own family. Human women stop having children around 50, but they don't die at 50. They can live 30, 40 more years, decades of healthy life after fertility switches off completely. In the cold logic of evolution, this should be impossible. Natural selection is obsessed with reproduction. An animal that spends a third of its life unable to reproduce should have been erased long ago. Now compare a chimpanzee, our closest cousin. A female chimp can breed almost until the day she dies, and she rarely lives past 50 at all. There is no chimpanzee retirement. Almost no chimp ever meets a grandchild, let alone digs at dinner. In the wild, a chimpanzee grandmother is nearly a contradiction in terms. So why did we get this strange extra chapter of life? Hawkes' answer is the grandmother hypothesis, and it's beautifully simple. A woman past 50 can't make more babies of her own, but she can pour those decades into making sure her daughter's babies survive, feeding them, carrying knowledge, freeing her daughter to have the next child sooner. And here is the twist that should stop you. By that logic, evolution didn't tolerate old age. Evolution built it. The long human lifespan may exist because grandmothers were so useful that living longer got selected for, generation after generation. We are, quite literally, the ape that evolved to have grandparents. But feeding the young is only half of what an elder gave. The other half you can't dig out of the ground. It lives inside their skull. Think about what a human brain becomes after 60 years on a dangerous planet. It is a library. A single mind holding a map of every waterhole for 100 miles. A memory of the last great drought, where the food still was when everything else dried up. Which plant swells your throat shut and which one breaks your fever. How to read a lion's mood, mend a spear, deliver a breech baby, find your way home in the dark. In a world with no writing, no books, no internet, that knowledge exists in exactly one place, the heads of the oldest people alive. And here's what makes it priceless. The rarest, most life-saving information, what to do in the disaster that strikes once every 50 years, can only be held by someone who was there 50 years ago. When the drought finally comes, the whole band's survival can hinge on one wrinkled elder pointing and saying, "I have seen this before, this way." And this knowledge was never free. It cost a lifetime to gather. You can't shortcut 60 years of watching the sky and reading the land. The only way to own that map is to have lived every mile of it, which means the map itself has to be kept alive, breathing, inside a person, for as long as that person can be kept breathing too. Kill your elders, and you don't just lose a slow pair of legs. You burn down the only library your people have. Every death of an old person, one anthropologist put it, is a library on fire. Now, this could all be a nice theory, except the ancient dead left us evidence, and it is almost unbearably human. Go back nearly 1.8 million years, to a place called Dmanisi, in the country of Georgia. There, researchers found the skull of an early human, one of the Homo erectus people. This individual was old and toothless, not a tooth left in his head, and crucially, the bone of the jaw had healed smooth over the empty sockets, which means he lost those teeth years before he died. Sit with that. A toothless creature, on a landscape of raw roots and tough game, who could not chew. He should have starved in weeks. He lived for years. Someone was bringing him soft food. Someone was keeping him alive. Almost 2 million years ago, before our own species even existed, somebody refused to walk away. Then jump forward to a Neanderthal, we call Shanidar I, found in a cave in Iraq. Anthropologists nicknamed him Nandi. When he died, he was around 45, ancient for a Neanderthal, and he was a wreck of old injuries, blind in one eye, a withered, likely useless right arm, damage to his legs that would have left him limping in pain. This was not a hunter. This was a man who could not have survived a single season alone, and yet he lived for years in that state, healed and cared for, fed by hands that weren't his own. That's not a theory anymore. That's a group of people, tens of thousands of years ago, choosing to spend their own scarce food keeping a broken old man alive. The care for the aged is written directly into the bones. And then, at one point in the human story, this quiet advantage exploded. Two anthropologists, Rachel Kaspari and Sang-Hee Lee, went looking for a number. They studied hundreds of fossil teeth across human evolution, working out for each population how many individuals lived to be genuinely old enough to be grandparents, versus how many died as young adults. They wanted the ratio of the old to the young. For most of our deep past, that ratio was grim. The old were badly outnumbered. But then they reached the modern humans of the Upper Paleolithic, the people of Europe around 30,000 years ago, the ones painting the cave walls. And the number leapt. In that group, for the first time, old people didn't just appear. They outnumbered the young, by a factor of roughly 5 compared to what came before. Suddenly, grandparents everywhere. Think about what a 5-fold surge in elders actually means. 5 times as many living libraries, 5 times as many grandmothers digging, teaching, feeding. Knowledge could now pile up across 3 generations instead of vanishing every time an adult died. And it lines up, hauntingly well, with an eruption of everything we call human: art, ornaments, better tools, wider trade. Kaspari and Lee argued this wasn't a coincidence. The moment humanity filled up with old people may be the very moment humanity took off. So here's where the whole story turns inside out. We tend to picture human strength as young. The fast legs, the strong arm, the hunter at his peak, that's the image of survival. The old, in that picture, are what evolution grudgingly puts up with once the real work is done, a cost. A kindness we can barely afford. Flip it around. The old weren't a cost our success paid for. They may have been the cause of it. The grandmother who couldn't hunt was manufacturing the next generation of hunters, feeding them, freeing their mothers, remembering the way through the famine that would have wiped everyone else out. Our closest relatives, the chimps, stay fast and fertile to the end, and they are stuck. We invented the slow, gray, useless elder, and we conquered the planet. The species that cared for the ones who couldn't keep up is the only species still here. Compassion wasn't a luxury we could afford once we got strong. Compassion is a reason we got strong at all. So the next time you watch an old person struggle, slow on the stairs, searching for a word, hands not quite steady, try to see what's really standing in front of you. Not a person past their use. The exact design that carried your bloodline through 2 million years of darkness. Every ancestor you have ever had was, at some point, fed by someone too old to hunt. You exist because a band of humans, somewhere back in the grass, made a choice no other animal makes. They looked at the one who could no longer run, no longer carry, no longer bring home the meat, and instead of leaving, they sat down beside them and shared the food. So here's the question worth carrying with you. If our whole species was built by keeping the old and the slow and the broken alive, if that mercy is the reason you are here to think this thought at all, then what does it say about us? That the moment we finally got strong enough not to need each other is the moment we started leaving them behind.